That day the sky was a pale gray, the kind that makes everything feel a little heavier than it should. I stood at the edge of my late father's estate, looking at the grand house my parents had spent their lives building. House now filled with people who had never truly cared for them. 52 of them, to be exact. 52 greedy faces, smiling, laughing, clinking glasses, pretending to mourn. Pretending to honor the man who gave them everything. I had been the one who cared for my father in his last years. Through every sleepless night, every painful breath, every time he forgot who I was. I was the one who cleaned his wounds, held his hand, and listened to him whisper that he regretted how he'd treated me compared to the others. But they, my so-called family, had only appeared when the will was mentioned. I arrived quietly, unnoticed at first. My cousin Lila, the self-proclaimed family organizer, was at the center of it all, her fake tears drying as quickly as they came. She was already talking about how the house should be divided. Who should get which car, which piece of jewelry, and which piece of memory. I stood in the corner, sipping cold coffee, my hands trembling, not with sadness anymore, but with something sharper. My father's lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, caught my eye and gave a small nod. He knew. He had helped me carry out my father's final wish. A wish that none of them saw coming. You see, my father had realized in his final weeks how much he had been blind to the truth. He saw how his siblings, his nieces, his nephews, all of them, had used his kindness, his money, his guilt. They visited only to take pictures, to show the world how caring they were. But when he needed them, they vanished. So he decided to teach them one final lesson. He asked me to make sure of it, and I did. When the time came, Mr. Hargrove called everyone to the living room. The chatter stopped. You could hear the hum of the old ceiling fan, the faint sound of rain starting outside. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, before I read the will. Mr. Anderson asked that we all listen to a message he recorded shortly before his passing. A ripple went through the crowd. Phones were lowered. Glasses clinked onto tables. Then the TV flickered on, showing my father frail, but still carrying that sharp look in his eyes. If you're hearing this, he began, then I'm gone. And if you're sitting in that room, it means I allowed you to be there. But some of you don't deserve to be. The room fell silent. I could see the color draining from a few faces. For years, he continued, I watched as people I called family took more than they ever gave. When I was sick, most of you were too busy. But when you heard there might be something to gain, suddenly you remembered my name. He chuckled weakly. So I've made some changes. I remember the way Aunt Marie gasped. Changes, she whispered, clutching her pearls like some tragic heroine. Yes, my father said in the video, as if responding to her. Changes. Every person in that room will receive something, but not what they expect. The video ended, and Mr. Hargrove began reading names. One by one, faces that had been smug a moment ago started to crumble. My cousin James got an envelope containing a photo of him standing beside my father's hospital bed, captioned, "The one and only time you showed up." My aunt got an empty jewelry box with a note that said, "You already took enough." My uncle received a $1 bill taped to a letter that read, "This is the only thing you ever gave me back." The silence grew thicker with every name. Then finally Mr. Hargrove said, and to my daughter, Emily, every eye turned to me. Double quotes, ... I leave the remainder of my estate, including this house, my savings, and all family properties. She knows what to do with them. Few people gasped. Others looked ready to explode. Lila stood up, shouting, "That's not fair." She manipulated him. She made him change everything. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her smiled. "You all had your chance," Mr. Hargrove said firmly. He made his decision. People started leaving, some in anger, some in tears. Lila, though, stayed behind. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice shaking. "You're still alone. No one here will ever talk to you again." I stepped closer, whispering, "That's fine. I'd rather be alone than surrounded by parasites." I watched her storm out, her heels clicking furiously on the marble floor. That night, I sat alone in my father's study, the rain tapping against the windows, thinking about what he'd said in his last days. "They'll hate you for doing this," he had told me. "But someday, they'll realize you've saved the family name." I wasn't sure he was right, but I wanted to believe it. Over the next few months, I sold almost everything: the cars, the vacation homes, even the yacht my father once adored. But not out of spite. I used the money to rebuild something he had once dreamed of, a foundation in my mother's name, for families in need, those who had no one to stand by them. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family who had everything learned what it meant to lose it all. And I, who had once been invisible, finally found peace in giving to those who truly deserved it. But peace doesn't last forever, not when people like Leela are still out there. She wasn't done. I started receiving strange letters, unsigned but clearly her handwriting. "You'll regret this," one said. "The truth will come out," said another. I ignored them at first. But then, one evening, as I returned home, I noticed something that froze me: the front door slightly open, the lights flickering inside. I stepped in slowly, my heart pounding. And that's where part one ends, with the shadows of greed returning once more. And a secret my father had left behind, still waiting to be uncovered. The house was eerily silent, except for the faint creak of the front door swinging against the wind. I stepped inside, my heels clicking softly against the marble, my breath shallow. The faint smell of my father's old cigar still lingered in the air, mingled with something else, something metallic. My pulse quickened. "Lila." I called out, my voice echoing. No response. I reached for the light switch, and the chandelier flickered back to life, illuminating the grand living room. Everything looked exactly as I'd left, except for one thing. On the coffee table sat an envelope, cream-colored, sealed with the same gold insignia my father used for his private letters. My throat went dry. The last time I'd seen that symbol, it was on the letter he'd given me before he passed. I picked it up carefully, my fingers trembling as I slid it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in his familiar, firm handwriting. "Emily. If you're reading this, it means the truth has found its way back to you. Be careful who you trust." My stomach twisted. I turned the page over and saw coordinates written in the corner: latitude and longitude. My father, even after death, was still leading me somewhere. I typed the coordinates into my phone. It pointed to a small cabin about 40 miles away my family never knew existed. I didn't wait till morning. I drove through the rain, my headlights slicing through the fog, the letter still clutched in my hand. When I arrived, the cabin stood hidden beneath towering pines. Old but well kept. I stepped inside cautiously, the wooden floor creaking beneath my boots. The air smelled of dust and memory. On the desk I found a metal box locked with a combination. Next to it was another note. The code is the date I realized who truly loved me. My mind raced through possibilities. Was it the day I moved in to take care of him? The day he signed the new will? Or maybe the day Mom died? I entered the date of my mother's death, and the lock clicked open. Inside were documents, old photographs, and a USB drive labeled simply "Truth." I plugged it into my laptop and waited. The screen filled with folders, bank records, emails, hidden camera footage. My eyes widened as I scrolled. My father hadn't just changed his will out of guilt. He'd discovered that Leela and Uncle Robert had been siphoning money from his accounts for years, using fake charity projects as a front. They'd stolen nearly $2 million. He'd gathered every piece of evidence but never confronted them directly. Instead, he'd left it all for me. My chest burned with anger and sorrow as I whispered, "You knew, Dad. You knew what they did." Suddenly, I heard a car outside. Headlights flashed through the window. I closed the laptop and grabbed the metal box, hiding it under the floorboards just as the front door burst open. Lila stood there, soaked from the rain, mascara running down her face, her eyes wild. "You just couldn't stop digging, could you?" she spat. "He told me you'd come here eventually." My heart pounded. "He told you?" She laughed bitterly. "Of course. I knew about this place before you did, but he never trusted me with the code." She stepped closer, her hand trembling. "You think you deserve everything, don't you? The money, the house, the sympathy? You think being the good daughter makes you better than us?" "I don't think I'm better," I said softly. "I just didn't lie to him." Her expression hardened. "He lied to us first." She reached into her bag and pulled out a lighter. "If I can't have his legacy, no one will." I froze. "Leela, don't." She flicked it, the flame dancing dangerously close to the curtains. "You ruined us," she hissed. "Now I'll ruin what's left of you." But before she could move, a voice from behind her made us both freeze. "Put it down, Lila." Mr. Hargrove stepped into the doorway, holding a flashlight. "Your father thought this might happen," he said to me. "He left instructions for me to follow if anyone tried to destroy his property." Lila's hand shook, tears filling her eyes. "He loved you more," she cried, her voice cracking. "Always. You." I took a slow step forward, because I never wanted anything from him, except love. Dropped the lighter, collapsing to her knees as police lights suddenly flashed through the window. Mr. Hargrove had called them on the way. They took her away quietly, her sobs echoing through the rain. I stood there in the doorway, numb, watching as the car disappeared down the muddy road. The next morning, I returned to the cabin and opened the box again. Among the papers, I found one last letter sealed in wax, addressed simply to my daughter. With trembling hands, I broke the seal and began to read. "Emily, if you're reading this, then everything has come to light. I was blind for too long, but you saw clearly. You have something the rest of them never understood, Heart. Don't let this bitterness consume you. Use what I left you, not for revenge, but for rebuilding." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, the anger finally broke, replaced by a quiet peace. Over the next few weeks, I worked with the authorities to hand over all the evidence against Lila and Robert. Their charities were exposed, their accounts frozen, and their names plastered across the news. For once, justice didn't need my vengeance. Sid had its own way of finding them. And yet, even after everything, I didn't celebrate. Instead, I focused on the foundation my father had wanted me to build. I opened a center for orphans in my mother's name using the last of the inheritance. Every brick, every room felt like a piece of healing. During the inauguration, I stood before the small crowd of volunteers and donors holding the microphone with steady hands. "Family isn't defined by blood," I said. "It's defined by loyalty, love, and sacrifice. Some of us learn that too, late, but some of us are lucky enough to rebuild before it's gone." The audience clapped softly. In the back, I noticed Mr. Hargrove smiling, a proud, knowing smile. Later that evening, as I locked the doors of the center, I looked up at the fading sunset. For the first time in years, I felt light. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "Someday, they'll understand. Maybe they never would." But months passed and life found its rhythm again. Then one afternoon, as I sorted through old papers in the study, I found another small envelope hidden beneath a drawer. My heart skipped. It wasn't my father's handwriting this time. It was my mother's inside. In her elegant cursive were just 3 words. He forgave them. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. That was the final piece, the closure neither of us had known we needed. I whispered, "I forgive them too." The pain didn't disappear, but it softened, like the sun after a long storm. I walked outside, the wind brushing against my face, the sound of laughter echoing from the orphan center next door. 52 people had once tried to break me, but it took only one father's love and one daughter's strength to rebuild something far greater than all their greed combined. Months later, Emily's life had shifted from loneliness to quiet purpose. The charity she founded grew into a network of small homes that offered shelter, schooling, and kindness to children who had none. Every time she walked through the courtyard, she felt her father's presence, not in the echoes of the past, but in the laughter of those kids. The townspeople who once whispered about her family's feud now spoke of her compassion instead. It was strange how quickly bitterness could fade when replaced with good work. Leela eventually completed her sentence and moved to another city. Emily never reached out, but she didn't speak against her either. Forgiveness, she had learned, didn't mean reunion, meant release. She chose peace over punishment, and that choice became her quiet victory. When reporters asked her if she regretted losing her family, she smiled and said, "You can't lose what was never truly yours. You can only create what you wish had existed." One rainy evening, Emily returned to her father's grave. She placed a single white rose there, the same kind her mother had loved. "I did what you asked, Dad," she whispered. "I rebuilt us." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth, and for a fleeting second, she thought she heard his voice, soft, approving, at peace. She looked toward the sky, no longer burdened by grief, but lifted by gratitude. That night, she walked home beneath the same gray clouds that had once felt heavy. Now, they simply felt like part of the story. In her heart, she carried the lesson that had taken years to learn, that true wealth isn't in inheritance or revenge, it's in the ability to love. Even after being broken, and though the past could never be erased, it had become the soil from which her new life grew. The house that had once echoed with greed now stood transformed into a center of hope, and every time the doors opened to welcome another lost soul. Emily knew without a doubt that her father's greatest gift wasn't his fortune, but the second chance he'd unknowingly given her.